Welcome to this week's episode of Awaken What's Up.
Today, we are going to be talking about transcending your trauma. Subtitle: You are not your trauma.
Awaken What's Up.
Welcome to Awaken What's Up. We are your hosts, Melissa and
Ethan. To define what trauma is such an individualized experience, right? Trauma can be as simple as having an aversion to something and being in a situation where that's enforced upon you, like forced upon you in a certain way. Or it can be the neglect of a parent when you're in your crib crying as a baby. Over time, accumulate to impact how we function within our day-to-day life now. So yeah, it's a great topic. I'm excited.
I am too. At first, it came to me in one of my classes for school. It's it's neurolinguistic programming, and it's with a doctor that has he's a generational clinical hypnotherapist. And one of the things that really stood out to me in class yesterday was he mentioned that talk therapy statistically only works 12% of the time.
Yeah, and it makes sense though, because if you look at the structure of how talk therapy works, it's like you're constantly hashing over again and again, like, what's going on, and the same story, and I think the most important thing to be able to truly let go of our transcend our trauma, if you will, is to actually let go of it, right? And if you're continually talking about it, in the way that you're talking about it isn't shifting, if you're still going into that hurt, victimized place, and that's not to minimize the effects of the trauma, but if you're still in that place, you can't force yourself to be someplace that you're not. You can't force yourself out of being healed from something you aren't truly healed from. And I've even noticed that within myself, over time in certain situations. Like let's say, for example, you get out of a relationship, right? And this is like a personal example, and you want to be someplace you're not, right? Like you want to be over the situation, you want to be happy, you don't want to feel all these like dense or more heavy emotions, but you have to go through it to get through it. And that's, simply stated.
So, just talking about our trauma and not identifying with it so much, to the point that we become over victimized, and going through our own work and doing our own personal healing journeys. There's something that is very prevalent. Doctor in a box is very common nowadays, right? And really, I noticed it took off post 2020, which was the whole world was traumatized. I mean, there's one like mass trauma that you could say is, you know what I mean,
Yep.
really kind of took hold, right? That people have all had, it affected everyone's life in a different way. And there became this real big push for talk therapy, right? And it's everywhere. And I feel like while talk therapy can be great, I've been to talk therapy in the past, I mean,
Talk therapy in the
most
past.
people have in some regard, right?
Yeah.
But when it becomes a crutch and you continuously are being re-traumatized, like there's that line where it's just not working anymore. Like I think, I'm a little bit older than you, so I can definitely say I've known people who have made careers out of being in talk therapy, like spent 20 plus years in talk therapy, and they're still going to therapy to talk about the same things. So at what point does it become, how do you transcend the trauma, right? Because you're just reliving it at that point. You're just embedding it, and it's just becoming something that becomes your identity.
Yeah, like over identifying with the experiences
Yes.
that you've had. And I think that the thing, especially within society, it's like our it's almost like, for example, like identity politics, not to get there, but just the whole thing of like, right, the identity, the individuality within our society, definitely in the West, is so important. Um, and I think that that's for like capital gain and that sort of thing. However, like when we look back at trauma quickly, it's interesting because everybody responds to trauma differently, right? So some people like project how it's affected them, whereas other people really internalize it. So, I think a good place to start is just like take some evaluation of the self and just kind of assess how you react when you're like triggered and it takes you back into something, or it makes you feel an emotion that feels sort of off kilter. Because if something's coming up, there's probably something there. And if we are choosing to not look at it and just, I guess you could say, bypass it or gloss over, that sort of thing, it's just going to keep coming up. So to be able to take every opportunity that you do experience a trigger to just be like, all right, let me take this back. And how far back can I go? Because if we are not going all the way back, and it may be beyond what we've experienced within this lifetime, or this reality, or this place. So, really interesting things can start to come up when you really tap into that, I guess you could say, multidimensionality of ourselves. And also, even if you have aversions to that idea, to just have fun with your creativity, right? Because, anything is possible. You could not make a choice and then constantly be beating yourself up about a choice that wasn't ever executed, right? So there's all these different fragments, and to be able to let the ones that need to be in entropy go into entropy, or the ones that need to be integrated to be integrated. Then there's just stuff that it's just there, right? And it doesn't have to be entangled within our biofield or within our mind, our thoughts, because if it's in the biofield, it's in our mind, it's there, and it's lingering. And it's an expense to our energy. So to be able to allow that stuff, let go, let go. This isn't my identity, right? I'm, yeah,
Yes. And most of, I have this saying, I always say, if you look at most adults, they're just wounded inner children running around in adult bodies. And you
right.
can see it in the personalities, the personas that are developed that are rooted in different traumas. One of the things that I feel is very important for people to understand is that there is no one in this world who has not been traumatized. People just respond and carry it differently. They build their trauma walls, their trauma personas, everything they can to cope with it. But we are in a time where the beauty of the doctor in a box, right, if you want to call it that, is that we're in a time where emotional intelligence and that awareness and self-awareness and willing to be accountable is encouraged and has become part of our society, which is super important. It's, back when I was growing up, I was raised with old school parents that came from the time of, and I think maybe, like you have some of this, you can understand in your family as well, which is the I'll give you something to cry over. No use crying over spilt milk. Oh, get on with it. Like
Yeah.
all these things that were just like gloss it over and carry on.
Yeah, like a
And
dismissiveness. There's a dismissive avoidance.
yes,
Like we're not
yes,
we're not going there.
yes.
Yeah.
And so the trauma just accumulates and it accumulates in then it's not dealt with. And then the parents have this personality and the adults have this personality, that's built around trauma and response to trauma. And then they inflict that into the children. It's been passed on and passed on. And so now we're in a time where, you know, the younger generations are like, no, we're not doing that. We don't want to pass that on, right? So there's a lot of unwinding all of that that's really there. It's great. But now again, do we want to identify with the trauma and make it our personality? Because when you get to that, it's no different than what the generations before us have done, is their personalities were built in response to the trauma. Does that make sense?
Definitely, definitely. And I would say that there's so many resources, right? Google is free, I think. No, but like, even like if you have to go to the library, right? You can go to the library and use a computer. There's so many resources. So the information's there, and there really is no excuse. So to be able to first realize the importance of taking responsibility for taking the initiative to be the change, within being the one who is control in how our lives unfold, there are other contributing factors because I mean, how many people are on this planet? You know? Um, so there's constant storylines going on and different things that happen and that sort of thing. But to be able to take the initiative to take that responsibility and start somewhere. Even if it's just like, oh, like what are attachment styles, right? Or um, what's the spiritual meaning or interpretation or folklore behind a specific presentation of something within your life? I know that at one point you shared the book, The Complete Dictionary of Ailments and Diseases. And I thought that was really interesting because, you know, things don't happen by coincidence. They really don't. So if something's coming up within your life, someone's been through it before, and there's probably patterns within how that's taking place or how it's presenting, or, like there's always some place to seek guidance, and it doesn't have to be outside of yourself. So I think the most important part is getting to a place of being able to trust yourself and know that um, we are so much more than the story we tell ourselves about our life and about what we've been through and about what's happened to us and about the inner child, because I think that as great as inner child and as important as it is, it can very easily, and it looks to me like it is being psyoped in the sense that you get there and then you just stay there and you're like, oh my gosh, this broken hurt, So then you're victimizing this pure divine essence of yourself that doesn't need to be victimized, because the only thing that that child has about anything that's happened to them is the confusion of like, but why? Like, because if you look at a child, like they're so curious, right? So when things are happening, yeah, there's an emotion, but we don't have the maturity to be able to place it and to have all, because when you learn a new word, for example, you're like, oh, I can place this. Okay, like yeah, I like totally, right? Um, so to be able to just open your mind because consciousness is on your side when you choose for it to be.
Yes. And that's, and so, I mean, there's, I guess you could say there's categories of trauma, right? Like the wounded inner child. Okay. I mean, that's a common one. Most people know some variation of what that means and
Definitely,
what it is, right?
definitely. Yeah.
And there's more obviously like clinically severe, such as PTSD, which you can have PTSD for very, I could say civilian, like commonplace reasons, being bullied or something like that, being like attacked and bitten by a dog, right? Like things like that that would cause PTSD. And then you have more of, like military things like that. And you can see in the different levels of being unhealthy in the mental and emotional body, right? That there's so many different tools now for therapy and transcending your trauma
Definitely.
And what made me think about that is, so, I'm a yoga teacher. And when I first started going to yoga years ago, people would start crying like in certain deep poses,
Okay.
right? And I would be like, why is this person like crying in pigeon pose, like opening their hips? And then I learned it's releasing trauma that's stuck in the body,
Right.
right?
Definitely. So it's like
And
somatic therapy in a sense, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I did a lot of continuing education on myofascial release, of releasing trauma through the axonal lines and vagus nerve balancing and things like that, balancing our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous system, coming out of that fight or flight. And there's a lot of beyond talk therapy. There's a lot of tools now to utilize to get the trauma out of your body, to process it as it comes up, and to be able to accept it
Yeah.
and integrate it and heal it to move forward. And that is what I feel is so important for people to understand, that you don't have to be your trauma. You don't have to be a victim.
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
I mean, all of it can be, let's face it, it can be traumatizing driving to work in traffic.
Right.
You know, I mean, trauma is literally everywhere in this world, in this matrix, whatever you want to call it. So you're not alone in that. There is no one who has not been traumatized. Even the people who on the surface may look like they have the best lives, whether they've chased like financial wealth, right? And so they've accumulated all this stuff. When you get to know a lot of those people, buried underneath the drivers for that is a lot of fear. They've come from lack. They've come from, an upbringing where they had nothing and they had to work for that security, and there's still like all this different trauma that's wound in it. So there's no one that has the perfect life. And what I often find is people that on the surface look like they're having a perfect life. It's no different than someone wearing their trauma on their sleeve, such as someone who has, addictions and problems from like PTSD and things like that, where it's very outwardly, you see it in that sense, it manifests that way. I have to win, I'm driven, I have to have this, I have to be better, I have to, da 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 da. It's still another version of it. We just think that those people are healed and they look better because, oh, well, he drives away in a Maserati and he goes to his fancy home, and, he's wearing the best suits and has beautiful, partners on, his arm and whatever. But underneath all of that, there's just as much, and sometimes not, even more trauma than the person who may have some outward addictions and seems like they're struggling in life,
Definitely.
right? It's
Definitely.
it's everywhere. Everybody has it. And I think that the first thing for people to be able to do to accept that you are not your trauma is to understand that I have yet to meet a person in my 40 years that has skated by unscathed with no trauma to speak of. It is not it is not a thing. It isn't, you know? So just knowing that and understanding that and being able to go, okay, it may look different for everyone. People may wear it differently. People may be in denial of it. People may be accepting of it, but to not make it your identity, right? Because you are so much more than that.
Right.
And to use the tools that are there, right? To really to find all the tools that are available to you and what works for you. There's amazing healers out there. There really is. Like you.
Thank you. Yeah. Something interesting to look at is how the body and mind are so enmeshed, body, mind, and spirit, right? It's not separate. So there are very real like biochemical processes taking place within the body when we have certain emotions and when we have certain experiences and when we have certain thoughts. So to be able to be conscientious of the thoughts that we're allowing ourselves to go and where we're allowing those things to take us emotionally. For example, let me paint a picture. So there's someone who has had a hard childhood, or maybe something happened within their life and it's made an effect. It's a trauma. Every time something happens that triggers that, or a memory, or a feeling, or a thought that's linked to that, they may not even be aware that it's connected to that because of how many times they've had experiences that lead back to that original unfolding of trauma. To not run from the feelings that are uncomfortable is so important because if you keep running from them, they're going to keep showing up and keep showing up. What you resist persists. Um, it really does. Most emotions last how long? Not even 90 seconds, right? So to be able to be like, whoa, let me identify what I am feeling in this moment. Something happens, take a second to breathe. We're so caught up in the go, 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 go of life. But 90 seconds, it's less than 5 minutes. It's less than 2 minutes. So um to be able to just excuse yourself in a situation, or even if you're just by yourself, hey, take that moment, turn inward, become your own guru, and take the magic pill of willing to be willing to look at that, right? What am I feeling? So to be able to pinpoint those things so that we can identify and tap into, you know, how my body is responding to certain situations because it always is, right? You walk into a room and you may feel off, or you walk into a room and you feel sad, or you walk into a room and you feel less energized, or you walk into a room and you feel all the opposite of that stuff, more energized, happy, light, right? So, and it's and it's something that I think should be second nature to all of us. Because if I'm constantly going somewhere and I'm not feeling how I want to be feeling, why am I constantly going there? What identity have I built around feeling like I constantly have to be there emotionally? What would I be if I didn't constantly do this? What is my identity? What image do you see for yourself? Who do you envision yourself to be? Who do we envision ourselves to be? We discussed in the last episode, like the placement of authority, right? So if you've constantly placed authority outside of yourself to be told who you are,
Mhm.
what if you stripped away all those projections? You know, who are you? And a lot of people I feel don't know. And that's okay, right? Because there's also a lot of people who do. And um, you know, it's a journey, right? It's a journey to coming back to that inner guru and not having to chase all those magic pills or sometimes those real ones. Um right? But it's all like we said, like the instant gratification, the need for that relief or that quick just okay, I can take a breath. But to be in that place is a constant choice. So to make it a habit of being able to sink into the body and not even sink, but to be in the body, to be embodied, and to have the integration and be able to take a breath and feel what's going on. Am I connected with my body? Do I even know what I'm feeling? Right?
Yeah.
It's such an important thing. There's so many important things today, right? I mean, this is this because so many people are led into, not only spirituality, but just um mental health and personal growth and all of that sort of stuff from and not even always extreme as the Dark Night of the Soul, but kind of like when people are looking for a guru or someone outside of themselves, they're in a vulnerable place. It's the same with this, right? Like we know there has to be something needs to change, right? So I think being able to call ourselves out and not be in denial of how things actually are and be able to accept the terms of our reality as it currently is and not run from that even when it may be not what we want. are different than what we envision for ourselves, all right, get out a pen and write what you do envision. Because if you want your life to be differently, but you don't have a vision of what that looks like, how are you going to get from A to Z? There's no roadmap. And we know how important, goals, little
Yeah.
goals, even if it's little, A to B, B to C, or, A to Z, we're going all the way. But so to have those just little changes over time, because the little changes are a lot more effective than a big change that only lasts a week, right? So to really integrate and embody the difference we're creating within our lives.
The embodiment topic, we're going to do a whole show on that.
Yes, we are.
It does tap into the somatic work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Of
definitely.
releasing stuck trauma and things that have been embedded in the tissues in the body.
Yeah,
Um, what I find is there's three things that all kind of prevent people from really getting in and doing that. And it's like shame, pride, and excuses. And what I mean by that is either the shame around the responses that they've had to trauma, right? Um, the way they've responded, they develop a I don't like to look at myself, or I feel like I would be shamed by society, the judgment of others for the way I've responded to my trauma. None of that matters.
yeah,
People can have their opinions. At the end of the day, who cares? You haven't walked in my body, you haven't lived my life, you haven't walked in my shoes. If my response to a trauma was that I sat around drinking for 3 straight days and then slept for a week, why is that any of your business? Why don't you go worry about your own trauma? Now, as long as I take action and don't just go down that rabbit hole, right, for the rest of my life,
yeah,
right? That's kind of what we're talking about, right? And then the pride, you know, um, there's this weird false pride of I've done my work. I've done my work. I've arrived. Really? Really? Because I bet you if I sat with you for an hour and started listening to you and dissecting your come from, we would find out that that is just a front, a wall that's put up, you know what I mean? That keeps you from penetrating the deeper work. It's like I've done the top layer, right?
ah,
Or I talked to somebody, so, I'm better than you. And then that cycles back into like the shaming the person who is in an active state of responding to their trauma in what will be considered like a negative or hurtful way to themselves, to oneself, right?
definitely.
And then there's the excuses. And the excuses are people that want to go to talk therapy for decades upon decades, circle the same topics, identify with them, and use them as an excuse to not grow and move beyond those one or two traumas that are their identifiers to really go deep and do the work and become whole. And
Definitely.
if you have those things going on, you don't want to get into the body because when you start doing the body work and you really start having to feel and pull that stuff up out of the connective tissue, the deep massage, whatever it is you're doing, yoga, trigger point therapy, etc., body tapping, which is kind of an older modality, but all of it across the board, right? When you really get into the body and feel where those traumas are stuck, even through something like breath work,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
It, those are the kind of excuses that keep people, the shame, the pride, the excuses, right? Those are the things that keep people in the self-talk, in this weird, like, oh, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. I've arrived or I'm stuck up, whatever it is. And those are that's like the line that gets drawn that keeps people from really getting into the body and embodying.
Definitely.
Make sense?
Yeah. I think also with that, because you talked about the pride and the shame and the excuses. I think another thing that's really important is like polarity. So catching yourself, when do I slip into polarity? Whether it's way over here, super, a little like hyper, and then there's like hypo, for example. But regardless of what it is, so like, it could be depression versus excitation. But, where do we draw the line? Like, how do we bring it back? And not from a place of being like numb or detached, but from a place of being able to stay balanced and coming from that neutral place of I am in control. I'm the one making decisions conscientiously, and it's not based on a reactive emotion or or like whatever it is. Like to be able to know that we're making choices that are nurturing ourselves in all situations. I think that that's another big thing. So watching that polarity, and of course we'll do a show on that too. So embodiment, we got polarity, we got it all. We got it.
Yes.
Yeah,
Finding neutral, right? Like slipping your car into neutral.
yeah, right, right.
We're not in reverse, parallel parking over a curb and hitting a stop sign. We're not going forward at full speed on the accelerator. We're just in neutral.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's really interesting, not to get too off topic, but for example, with what dealing with all of this looks like in our day-to-day life, right? Because somebody would say that, the path of least resistance, for example, right, would be you would think to keep doing the same thing. But is that really the path of least resistance? And I don't think so, because if you were truly just to be, it would just come up naturally, and that would truly be the path of least resistance. To just not have resistance. But even that is, you know, a whole can of worms.
Oh, yeah. That sounds, what you're talking about sounds like people who stay super busy and distracted so they don't have to look at the trauma and do the work
Yeah, sounds
and
like
not
a habit.
realizing that
Sounds
the
like a habit
trauma
that
is running them because they're behaving that way.
and I've been familiar with that habit, right? And it's so interesting because dependent upon how people are like brought up affects how they avoid or how they, you know, gloss over or gloss by that having to go within and do that stuff. Like, it's you can be in a really like depressive, like down place, but then that becomes your identity, right? Or you can be, like I'm go, 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 wee, all the time. And that's your identity, right? So to be able to just go with the flow and let it go, because that's going with the flow, really. I think that, like we were talking about, there's so many resources and there's so many different ways to really address the different traumas and situations within our lives that have caused for, an identity, which is really just a fragment that we choose to hold close. So, you know, I feel that when people are ready, truly, that stuff comes up, right? Like for example,
Yeah.
um, different healing modalities, that sort of thing. They come within your realm or experience of life when you're ready to, look at those things. I think another thing with that is to make it a priority. So if you have to put it on your schedule and treat it like it's a job, do it. Hey, this is my non-negotiable hour with myself, and I do it either in the morning, after work, before bed, but it's on my schedule and it's a priority. Or, even if you have to take 5 minutes a day and go to the bathroom and be like, hey, I'm gonna sit down with you for a minute and I'm gonna check in. Because if we can't be present for ourselves, we definitely cannot show up and be present to the best of our ability for others. So to really start to do everything for ourselves, but don't get attached and overly identified with being independent, overly independent, because that's another thing. There's just so many different directions you can take it because like we said, everyone's been through trauma. It's constant, it's unavoidable, it's Earth. Welcome. You will be traumatized. You will be traumatized before you get out of here, whether you know it or not. Um, so, yeah, I think the biggest things are really being able to find what works. And that's in any situation, right? It doesn't just have to be with trauma. So, if it's body work, like you were talking about, or if it's something, maybe it does start with talk therapy, right? But to not get stuck or overly attached to anything. Um, and those things happen to stem from trauma. Interestingly enough, get comfortable being uncomfortable because that's life for you.
Very true. Very true. And one last thing that you just brought up there, the responses to that we develop to trauma, you tapped into something there, which is a lot of times because people don't want to look at themselves, they are the ones running around helping everyone else.
And look at the like
Don't take
the
time for.
victimizer and healer complex right there, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, even being in the healing realm is a form, right? Depending upon, and that's a blanket statement, which are never good. Life happens. It's about how we're responding and how we choose to show up, because I think that says a lot about us, and accountability is important. So to be able to first hold ourselves accountable, because it's not our job to hold anyone else accountable. What a fun conversation.
Yes, a much needed one because I just think that people are so hard on themselves and they don't realize lots of times that even though they feel alone in their trauma, it is it is a byproduct of being here in this world, and there is no one that has gone unscathed. And once you accept that alone, it helps to release that feeling of being isolated in your trauma. And it really helps to start going, okay, okay.
And it takes the shame out of it. It takes the pride out of it. And guess what? Regardless of those two things, they're both excuses. They really are. So let go of excuses in their entirety. No excuses. Something comes up, all right, I'm addressing it. Or if I can't address it right in that moment, because life can get crazy, well, it's getting addressed and we're going back to it.
Yes. And
Right?
not creating more obstacles around you to avoid dealing with it. Like the craziness, the chaos, right?
Definitely.
It's very easy. We have so many distractions now with internet and stuff where it's like, oh, I could go take that walk in nature or take those minutes I need to just connect with self. But I could also get on Instagram, then I could respond to so and so, and then I could make a phone call, and then I could da 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 and da 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 da, right?
When
So
all the inner child was asking for was a walk in nature.
perfect place to end it. All the inner child was asking for is a walk in nature.
Yes. And here we are. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in today. And we'd really, really appreciate it if you could like, comment, and subscribe, and maybe even share it with a friend.
Yes, and any ideas or topics that anyone has that they would love to hear Ethan and I discuss, we come from an extensive background of healing modalities between the two of us and a lot of working with people for combined, I would say 30 years between the two of us. So we have a lot of in the now real world experience and practicality that we're drawing from to hopefully drop some little tidbits in your field that will help you and remind you that you are not alone and there's always help, resources, knowledge, which is power out there for you. Thank you. See you next time.